There are three commonly used models that are used to classify acids and bases. And those models are the Arrhenius model, the Bronsted-Lowry model, and the Lewis model. Under the Arrhenius model, acids are going to increase the hydrogen ion concentration when acids are dissolved in water. An acid under the Bronsted-Lowry model is going to donate H+ ions to another substance. And an acid under the Lewis model is going to accept an electron pair from another substance. The Arrhenius and Bronsted-Lowry models are similar and fairly specific in that they're primarily concerned with H+ ions when it comes to acids. The Lewis model is a little bit broader in that it's concerned with the transfer of electron pairs. An Arrhenius base is going to increase the hydroxide ion concentration when dissolved in water. Under the Bronsted-Lowry model, a base is a material that accepts H+ ions that are donated by another substance. And finally, a Lewis base is something that donates an electron pair to another substance. So now we'll look at examples for each of the different models. And we'll start with the Arrhenius model. Under the Arrhenius model, HCl is an acid. When you add it to water, it produces H+ ions. And that means the concentration of H+ in the water goes up. And by a similar kind of argument, sodium hydroxide is going to be an Arrhenius base. When you dissolve sodium hydroxide in water, it produces OH- ions, and that increases the concentration of OH- in the water. With the Bronsted-Lowry model, acid-base behavior implies a chemical reaction because a donation of an H+ ion has to occur. So this is an example of a very straightforward Bronsted-Lowry reaction, where HCl is the acid and the OH- ion is the base. The HCl donates an H+ to the OH-. The H+ combines with the OH- to make H2O, and then the Cl- ion is left over. This is a simplified version of something that was almost certainly taught in high school and that you've probably seen before, the reaction of sodium hydroxide and HCl. You may have heard the expression, an acid plus base yields salt plus water. That expression applies to Bronsted-Lowry reactions, where the acid-base reaction is a metathesis reaction. The H+ is donated to the OH-, and the remaining cation and anion are going to pair up. With the Bronsted-Lowry model, the base doesn't need an OH- group. The base just has to be something that can accept an H+ ion. So a common Bronsted-Lowry base is ammonia, the NH3 molecule. Again, our HCl is the acid and it donates the H+, and we make NH4+, the ammonium ion, and the chloride ion. So this kind of situation does not yield a salt plus water. Depending on how you write the reaction, you can have NH4+ and Cl-, or you could also write NH4Cl and just have the salt, but no water is produced because there's no hydroxide ions involved. And even something as simple as adding acid to water will cause a reaction. So anything that is a Bronsted-Lowry acid is also effectively an Arrhenius acid. So this reaction, where you add HCl to water, produces H3O plus and Cl minus. And the reason that the Bronsted-Lowry HCl is exactly the same as the Arrhenius HCl is that when you add H plus to water, the H plus is going to interact with the water to make H3O plus. So even in the Arrhenius example of HCl, where you dissolve the HCl in water, we wrote it as producing H plus ions that are aqueous. H plus ions that are aqueous actually form H3O plus. And Bronsted-Lowry bases are also fairly easy to work with. They accept the H plus ion. So in the examples we've done so far, whatever the H plus ion was donated to has been the base. And we can see how Arrhenius and Bronsted-Lowry bases are going to be similar. OH minus ions, the hydroxide ion, are Arrhenius bases. When you add them to water, they increase the concentration of OH minus in the water. But they're also Bronsted-Lowry bases because they accept the H plus ion that's donated by an acid. In this case, the acid is the water. The Lewis model for acids and bases also implies a chemical reaction, just like the Bronsted-Lowry system. And with the Lewis system, it's really important that you know how to draw the Lewis structures, because the Lewis structures are going to allow you to identify which materials have the electron pairs that can be donated or accepted. So in this case, our H plus ion has no electrons available to it, so it can accept an electron pair from another substance. So the H plus is a Lewis acid. The OH minus ion has a lot of lone pairs of electrons that it can afford to donate to another material, so it becomes a Lewis base. So in many ways, this is kind of similar to the Bronsted-Lowry model, but it's much broader in scope because it doesn't require a proton source like you usually think about acids and bases. So anything with an empty orbital can act to some degree as a Lewis acid because that empty orbital can accept electrons. And this includes most cations. Cations with small charges, like for example the sodium plus ion, don't work particularly well as Lewis acids, but anything with larger charges, for example the Fe3 plus ion, typically has fairly acidic behavior. So the iron 3 plus ion acts as a Lewis acid, and it reacts with water with its two lone pairs of electrons, and that water is going to act as the Lewis base, and you make a complex. And because the iron is pulling some of that electron density away from the oxygen, it causes the oxygen-hydrogen bonds to become more polar. And that makes the hydrogen parts of the water molecule more positively charged and more acidic. And that makes the H plus ion more likely to dissociate from that water molecule, and then increasing the H plus concentration in the water. A final example of a Lewis acid-base reaction is the reaction of BF3 with ammonia. And this process involves almost nothing that looks like a traditional acid or base. But you have an electron-deficient boron atom. That boron in the BF3 molecule doesn't have a complete octet, so it can accept electrons. And the ammonia molecule has a lone pair of electrons that it can donate. So your BF3 accepts the electron pair, so it's an acid. The ammonia donates the electron pair, so it's a base. And the product of this reaction is a molecule that's bonded between the boron and the nitrogen. And of course, these are terrible Lewis structures. I've left out all the lone pairs on the fluorine atoms, but I did that on purpose for reasons of clarity.